I'm going to share with you one solution to help you improve your watercolour painting. So let's get started. So I'm just going to draw a simple sketch, just a horizon line here about a third of the way down from the top. Some trees here. I'm using an HB pencil on rough 300 grams watercolour paper, a few grasses in the foreground as well. I'm going to use Paynes grey. You can use black or any dark colour. And that's the solution. It's just to take away the issue of colour, the problem of colour, and just get used to using watercolour. And this is a great exercise for beginners. So I'm mixing up 2 washes here with my size 10 round brush, a light and a medium wash. Always mix up plenty of paint. That way you don't have to start mixing while you're in the middle of painting a wash. So I am wetting the watercolour paper with a large brush all over. Take your time doing this. Let the water soak in. It gives you longer to paint. And what I'm doing now is I'm painting the light wash first. In watercolour, we work light to dark. So I'm painting this from the sky to the middle distance right down to the foreground. And now I'm using the mid-tone and painting the sort of top and the middle of the sky. So it's slightly darker at the top and it gets lighter as it goes towards the horizon. And I'm painting the reflection of the trees now, wet into wet, with my size 10 round brush, just with that mid-tone wash. So as you can see there, I'm just creating the illusion of the reflection of the trees, painting a few ripples in the water. And just to say, this painting is from my imagination. I usually use this one as a sort of first painting for beginners when they join my class. And it just takes all the pressure off and they really love doing it. So I have swapped to a smaller brush. It's a size 6 round to make and paint smaller marks using that mid-tone. If you notice, the sky is darker at the top, lighter at the horizon area, and that creates depth in your painting. So what's nearer to you is stronger in tonal value. So I'm just adding a few more sort of marks here with the reflection, wet into wet. Now I'm mixing up some thicker paint here, less water, more paint, and I'm painting the trees damp into damp. So the surface isn't as wet and the paint isn't as wet. And you might want to take off the excess paint on a paper towel to help you as well with this technique. So I'm going to allow my painting to dry thoroughly. And what I'm doing now to get a straight horizon, a water's edge here, I'm using some framing tape. You can use masking tape, and I'm sticking it to the dry surface just at the top part of the tape. Do test your paper to make sure that your paper doesn't tear. Some watercolour papers don't like masking tape. So I'm sponging the trees just using that Paynes grey. And as you can see, it's a little bit darker, and I'm just sponging where I painted the trees before. So it's kind of like the underpainting. I'm using a natural sponge, but you could use a synthetic sponge. And I'm sponging wet on dry and pressing very gently so you get some nice textures. And try to vary the pattern as well. So change the angle of your wrist so you get sort of different sort of pattern and it doesn't look too symmetrical. And I'm going to allow my painting to dry. I'm using a small round brush and I'm painting in the tree trunks and branches wet on dry using a darker mix of that Paynes grey. So I'm gradually working sort of light mid-tones and dark tones. This is a really dark Paynes grey and I'm painting that wet on dry in front of those trees with the size 2 brush. And I'm carefully removing the framing tape. You might want to use a hairdryer to sort of heat up the glue and it makes it easier to remove it. And as you can see, I've got a lovely straight line there. What I'm doing now is I'm wetting the paper carefully with clean water using my flat 1-inch brush, and I'm painting the reflections damp into damp. And as you can see there, it's not running too much. If it is running too much, just take the excess paint off on a paper towel. But I'm just sort of mirroring the actual tree trunks that I painted earlier. And as you can see, it looks really effective as well. And I'm going to sponge a sort of dilute Paynes grey here, damp into damp, just in the water area, just to give the impression of the reflection of the foliage of those trees. I'm just going back into the trees and sponging wet on dry, just to build up a few more darks and details there. And allow your painting to dry once more. What I'm doing now is I'm painting a branch that's sort of in the foreground. So it's quite dark, this colour. And I'm painting it wet on dry over the water area and over those trees in the sort of middle ground. So it creates the illusion of depth in your painting. Because the tonal value is darker, it comes forward and you can't see the tree trunks going through it. I've made it slightly thicker as well. So I'm just going to sort of build up the detail here. Take your time as well when you're painting tree trunks and branches. As you saw there, I just sort of did a couple of curvy lines, as I'm doing there. And then I join them up, and that's a way of creating and painting branches. It makes it so much easier and more natural looking. So make the branches thicker, and as you move on to the smaller branches, make them a little bit smaller, and as you go on to those little twigs, make them really small. And sort of as you get to the end of the twig, lift off with your brush so the line becomes thinner. When you press down with the brush hairs, the marks can be thicker. So as you lift off a little bit, take the pressure off the hairs, they'll become thinner. And it's a good one to practice this as well. It's a good skill to have in watercolour painting. But as you can see, just using one colour takes a lot of the pressure off, because you don't have to think about mixing colours. You can just concentrate on the techniques and building up light to dark, which is what we traditionally do in watercolour painting. What I'm doing now is I'm sort of painting leaves. Have you noticed I'm sort of just barely touching the paper, or just sort of pressing down, then lifting off. I'm varying the size of the leaves as well, so having a couple smaller, some medium and some larger, and it just makes it look a little bit more realistic. So excuse my hand there, but I'm just painting some leaves at the top. And another tip, actually, I don't actually do it here, but you could actually turn your painting upside down to paint the leaves at the top and the twigs and branches. Sometimes it's hard to lean across a painting and keep your hand steady. So do turn it upside down, or even sideways as well. So this is just Paynes grey and the size 2 brush. It's a round brush, and I'm just sort of painting some smaller leaves here, literally flicking the sort of brush there to create sort of different sort of marks and smaller leaves. What I'm doing now is I'm painting grasses in the foreground using a dark Paynes grey, wet on dry. If you notice, because the paper is quite rough as well, you get a dry brush effect. You can see there's lovely texture in the grasses there, and texture comes forward because this is in the foreground. Again, it creates depth in your painting. Texture, darker tonal values, bigger marks, it all adds to the depth in your painting, brings things forward. So I'm just painting some details here. Details as well makes your paintings look more 3D. So I'm just using that size 2 brush, painting wet on dry, some sort of little wildflowers and sort of foliage just here on the water's edge in the foreground. Remember, keep it simple. You don't have to paint loads of detail. Remember, in watercolour, less is more. So what I'm going to do now to stop painting anymore, I'm going to spatter with a toothbrush. It is an old toothbrush, and I've loaded it with some medium sort of Paynes grey paint. And as you see there, I'm actually rubbing my index finger along the hairs of the brush, and that spatters it. But you may want to practice this beforehand. So I am removing the framing tape now, which creates a really nice white border and gives me time to assess to see if I need to do any more to my painting. But I think I'll leave it there for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments section. And if you'd like to get access to my weekly exclusive watercolour tutorials, why not think about joining my Patreon membership? Details about the membership can be found in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. Happy one colour painting. Bye for now.